Hello and welcome to our tutorial. This is a very quick overview of sculpting. So we left our last tutorial in this place here. So I'm just going to take my skeleton here and turn off X-ray so I don't have to worry about it getting in the way while I'm sculpting. So there's two basic types of sculpting. So I can select the mesh and I can go to my modifier stack and I can add a multi-resolution modifier, and then I can start, I'm actually going to move this up on top, I can start subdividing it, and it works like a subdivision surface modifier. I'm going to point this out. This was about 400 verts and now it's 347 thousandths. I click this here and it'll go to 1.4 million or thereabouts, 1.388 million verts. That's at subdivision level 6, and you can see that the character is very rounded. Now I can then go and sculpt this, so I can go to sculpt mode, and we're just going to go to the clay strips tool. So click on the icon, click here, and we'll do a very quick sculpt. It's going to show you the mirroring. So you can see I've drawn on this side and it has duplicated on this side, and that's to do with I have a symmetry selected over here. By default it's on X mirror. That's obviously only if your model is sat on the Z axis at 0 or at the X axis at 0, so half the model is on the positive side of X, half the model is on the negative side of X. So that's how that works. This method of so the method of sculpting, of actually using the tools, is this a really interesting, and I can press F, make my radius bigger or smaller. It's the same as using last, and I can do all sorts of changes here to the model. But this method here of adding a multi-resolution modifier is very handy, and it's kind of an older way of sculpting. It's not what's used anymore, or at least it's not what's used widely anymore, and that's because it subdivides the entire mesh. So there's as much geometry in the heel of the foot as there is in the face. And obviously when you look at a character, you look at its face, not necessarily its heel. So to have a similar amount of subdivision down there as there is in the face means that it's not a good method. Also, if I take this here, if I'm just going to like a hook tool, so I can start taking this away. This looks fine now, but if I keep doing this, you'll see the vertices start to stretch. And that's because even though there's 1.4 million of them, as I stretch them out here, that 1.4 million is spread out over the whole model, and therefore if I just picked one patch maybe of 1,000 and I keep stretching and stretching and stretching, eventually I'll get down to hundreds of vertices and then individual vertices, and I'll get distortions and anomalies that look like this, which are not desirable. So how do we get around that? Well, we don't use this method, so we turn that off and we go back to our original. What we're going to do is, so if you were sitting there in object mode, just with the mesh selected, go into sculpt mode, and then what we want to do is we're going to select our clay strips tool. We'll look at the tools in a minute, and what I want you to do is turn this on here. It says Dino Topo, which is dynamic topography. We turn that on. It says, if there's any other sculpting being done to this, I'm going to delete it. So we go OK. I can open it up. We'll have a look in a minute at some of these settings. And what this allows us to do is, as we sculpt, it's only sculpting in a local way. So it's only sculpting where we draw over. Okay, so we can add detail, but just to the areas that we're interested in. So I can start, as I would if I had a piece of clay, I can start sculpting it. So these tools are really excellent. So I have a grab tool, so I can start, let's go F and make this a bit bigger. I can start reshaping the face. And make it a bit more interesting. I can reshape regardless of how many verts I have. I can move these in and out. Obviously, it's more. This tool comes into its own when you've got a lot of vertices. Trying to move them individually would be very difficult. I've got a smooth tool to smooth over an area, and I've got a whole bunch of tools. Normally, their name sort of depicts what they do. So, inflate, scrape. You've got you can kind of thumb something up, which is sort of like a smudge tool. The ones I use the most are clay strips, grab, and smooth. Layering can be interesting as well. So you can draw, and masking actually. Masking is very powerful. You can draw a mask, and basically where you draw the mask, when you then sculpt over that area, wherever you've drawn the mask will not be affected. So if you have an area that you're happy with, but you want to sculpt around it, it's a good idea to draw a quick mask on it, and then it will be unaffected by the other sculpting that you're going to do. So for now, I'm just going to click on clay strips, and I'm going to use this. So I'm going to just do some sort of very basic sort of sculpting. I want to inflate this sort of shoulder area. I can increase the strength of my brush so that there is more geometry added. Now the size of the geometry that's added, so these triangles that are being added in here, how big are they and why are they that big? Well, that's determined down here. And the most important thing to remember when you're sculpting is that the size of these triangles is actually determined by how big the object is in the viewport. So if I'm in very close, I'm adding in lots of detail. If I'm out quite far, I'm adding in broader strokes. And at this stage, what we're interested in is broader strokes. Now, if I want to invert the brush, so negatize it, so I'm actually making an indentation, I can hold down the Control key, and the Control key will negatize something. So let's have an example of that. So we'll look here at this kind of chest area. So let's say I wanted to draw in a few ribs. Now, I wouldn't put in ribs at this stage normally because this is a very crude beginning point. Oops. Now, I have a problem there. We'll come back and fix that in a minute. If I want to negatize my brush, I can go F and bring it down smaller, and then you can see I'm actually cutting into the model rather than adding geometry to it. So you have to be careful when you're sculpting. So I was sculpting underneath here, and I've made a couple of errors here with the connecting, my brush was too big basically. So what I want to do is I want to repair this sort of here. So I'm going to I use my grab tool and move these across here. I'm going to have to add more geometry here to fix that. But what I'm doing in this particular exercise, I'm not worried about too much. If you find yourself, as you sculpt, getting into these problems where you've added geometry and you end up with a hole in something, it is possible just to keep drawing over it and it will fix it. But to inflate your way out of the problem. But you can see here I have a few little anomalies that might be difficult to fix. But we'll not worry about them too much for now. And the cause of these problems is my brush is too big. So I'm inflating one side while deflating the other. So the way to not get the problems that Noel has here is to not use too big a brush. Okay. So we're just going to have a look at the face for a minute, and we'll do a tiny bit of work on the face, and then I suppose you get the idea. So I'm going to hold down the Control key, and I'm going to make an indentation here for an eye socket. I'm going to draw a brow over the top. I'm going to give my brush a bit bigger, make some sort of nose. And I'm going to build up a little bit of geometry here for sort of a jaw, or a lower. Okay. And then I can decrease the size of my brush and put in basically a indentation for mount, add in maybe holding on the control key, add in a nostril. So you can see it's you can get all sorts of really interesting, you can make interesting shapes and have a lot of fun doing this. So I'm gonna make this a bit bigger, and then Hellboy, like I'm gonna hold down the Shift key, and I'm gonna flatten the top, and then I'm going to use my crease tool around the edge. To give me a better edge. Okay. So you can see sculpting is very artistic. It's good fun. The first time you do it, you're not going to get terribly desirable results. It is possible to do all sorts of funky things that are hard to undo, so you should be saving regularly. The thing to remember with sculpting is this detail size here, 12. So it's relative to the size of the viewport. So if I zoom right in and I start sculpting now, hang on, sorry, I add in clay strips. I'm at the detail level on the viewport. And then as I zoom back out, you can see that that is a very detailed mesh. If I want to get rid of that detail, all I have to do is at a zoomed out point, just draw over it. And then I've literally deleted the detail underneath, which is great, but also scary, because it means you can do a lot of work, and then with one brush stroke, it's all gone. Obviously, you can undo that, but you have to be careful. So, yeah, it's important that you have a plan before you sculpt, because you can sculpt forever if you are not sure about exactly how you're going to go about your sculpt. There are a couple of very good time-lapse videos. So this one here, if you could put in Fat Batman Blender sculpting or time-lapse, it's Fat Batman sculpting time-lapse, you'll see a very basic character here being manipulated, and then he ends up with a very detailed, excellent model of Batman. But yeah, so there's plenty of them around for you to look at. Okay, that's it for now. This is just a basic sort of introduction to show you sort of some of the tools. Like I said, the ones that you'll use most at the beginning are clay strips, the smooth tool, which you can toggle to by holding down the Shift key while sculpting. So I can go use clay strips and hold down Shift, and then I'm smoothing, I'm drawing, I'm smoothing, and then holding down Control negatizes the brush. So yeah, experiment with those tools.